Russia has historically had a problem with dealing with opposition leaders. Out of all the three radically different governments Russia has had in the past 100 years or so, whether you're talking the Tsar, the USSR, or the current Russian Federation, the common through line is that people who speak against these governments have a tendency to wind up in prison, and they have a tendency to wind up dead. Unfortunately, that is what happened to Alexei Navalny, the last most prominent opposition leader in Russia. But that leads us to today's question. Will Yulia Navalnaya, Navalny's wife, be an effective opposition leader in Russia? While I like to be an optimist when answering questions like this, I do have to provide real answers. And the real answer to this question is a simple no. The opposition in Russia is simply not united enough and not effective enough to provide any means for real change in Russia. And there are three reasons why that's the case. First, the opposition in Russia that actually exists within the government is not actually interested in being in opposition to the government. I don't know how often this gets brought up in newscasts, but there are actually opposition parties that have seats in the Russian Duma who, on paper, should have some amount of power. According to a European Parliament report, the two most prominent of these parties is the Russian Communist Party and the Russian Liberal Party. But these two parties have effectively been neutered. And they simply are not going to associate themselves with someone like Navalnaya. They are what could be described as controlled opposition. They have comfortable seats where they are, and they don't want to rock the boat. And the reason I think this is worth mentioning is that it just shows that, hypothetically, the people who should be the most powerful opposition voices in Russia, the people who have the power to potentially make a stand against Putin, are not going to do so, and they're not going to give their place to people who would do so. So, even what little leeway an opposition movement would have in making in obtaining legal power in Russia, they simply can't, because those spots are being taken up by lame ducks. Next, the second reason why Navalnaya probably won't be an effective opposition leader. The second reason is that the opposition movement is scattered, absolutely scattered. And they often struggle to actually work together. According to AP of February 19th, 2024, the Anti-Corruption Foundation, the organization that Alexei Navalny founded and led throughout his life, simply refuses to work with any other anti-Putin movements from abroad. The reason for this isn't exactly clear, but if the strongest movements cannot unite and actually put together an organized resistance against Putin, it stands to reason that the opposition is not going to be able to make any decent stand against him. In addition to that, according to that same Associated Press report, most of the opposition from Russia are either in exile, in prison, or dead. So they refuse to work together, and then they also have limited resources to begin with. The opposition movement is decimated at the moment, especially after the loss of Alexei. It really is unfortunate that they can't muster a resistance right now. So this brings us to the third reason why the opposition movement, why Navalny would not be able to be an effective opposition leader. And that reason is that the opposition was already ineffective even when Navalny was leading it. This is an uncomfortable truth. According to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace of October 24th, 2021, the Anti-Corruption Foundation consistently failed at actually garnering any consistent support from the general public of Russia, besides some few diehard supporters. It was never really an effective organized political movement to begin with. And then, in addition to that, of NBC, according to NBC of February 22nd, 2023, the opposition within Russia can only really agree that they're anti-Putin, and they can't really agree on anything else. And that includes what means they should resist Putin by. Many of them want to try and pave their way into the government. Some want armed resistance. They can't decide on their methods, and so they are ineffective. So that brings us to the question, will she be able to be an effective leader? The answer is no, because the opposition movement has failed her.